So I want to thank you all for joining me because this is a topic that I care a lot about. And of course, I hope that a lot of other people care a lot about it too. I don't think I need to tell you that the social impact of artificial intelligence is something that everybody is talking about today. But as Martin beautifully set me up in his opening keynote, I think that us here as technologists, we really have a unique role, a unique opportunity to play. And so I'm going to share some tools and some ideas about how we can do better, how we can create AI or, generally technical systems that are going to be creating the society that we want to live in. So Monica already did a great intro for me, but I'll just mention briefly that my background largely is data science. I started more in the statistics side of things with the Canadian National Statistical Agency before coming to Google, and that's where I really learned data science, I guess. And these days, I actually am now on a project where I actually get to do some coding again, and it's actually a lot of fun. But most of the time these days, I'm working more in the kind of tech policy space or doing data-driven research to help support advocacy work, calling on tech platforms to do better. So I'm going to talk about responsible AI, and first of all, we need to decide what that is and why it's important. And I hope all of you have some ideas, but I think that if we come to a little bit of a consensus and align a little bit on what we're actually talking about, we're going to get more out of the talk. So let's dig into that. I'm going to steal a little bit from Rebecca Parsons. She's the former CTO from Thoughtworks, and she's actually giving the closing keynote today. So I actually texted her just to make sure she's not going to tell this story, and she gave me permission to go ahead because I always steal this from her. So she has this framework I like. We have a lot of words. There's trustworthy AI, there's data privacy, there's ethical AI, there's responsible AI, and I don't think anybody's entirely sure what they all mean, besides the AI versus ML versus whatever else. But this is a simple framework that I think is going to lend some clarity to our conversations. So if we talk about ethical technology, that's just a matter of what values are we encoding with the technology that we're building. So if you are building malware to encrypt people's data and hold it ransom until they send you Bitcoin or whatever, that's probably unethical technology. Like the intention there is not good. Similarly, maybe you have a more benign product, but you're using some dark pattern to trick people into consenting to giving their firstborn son or whatever in exchange for use of the product. That's probably unethical as well. And I think the questions of ethics in tech are interesting, but they're a little bit less interesting to me. I think they're a little bit easier somehow. And I think a lot of us have some moral compass and we can tell if what we're being asked to do is a good thing or a bad thing for the world. Where I think things get more interesting is responsible technology. So this is really just robust, good engineering when it comes down to it. It's a question, is the system that we're building actually accomplishing what we've designed it to do? What else is it doing? What unintended consequences might there be? Do we really understand the needs of our stakeholders? This is responsible technology. So the story that I shamelessly steal from Rebecca, at Thoughtworks, we have this sabbatical program. So if you've been at Thoughtworks for 10 years, you get to take, I don't know if it's 3 or 6 months or something like that, and just kind of do your thing. So she decided to go do some development work with some NGOs operating in the global south. And there was one of them that was building water pipes for villages there. So they were in some village, I don't remember where to be honest, but they had a water source that was, I don't know, maybe 2 kilometers outside of the town. And so every morning, the village women would have to hike that 2 kilometers, fill up their water containers and hike back carrying these probably heavy containers and everything. And so they thought, hey, let's come in and let's make things better. Let's build a pipe so they can have water, right in the middle of the village. And so they got to work. They spent the day building this pipeline and everything. And then overnight, they had some rest, came back the next day, and somebody had sabotaged their work. And they were just like, who is sabotaging this? Who could possibly be against, accessibility of water, whatever. So they finally talked to the people in the village. And this is probably something they should have done first. This is about understanding the needs of your stakeholders. And it turned out that it was the women that had been sabotaging this work. And the reason was that in the cultural context of this village, the only opportunity that these women had to talk to anyone outside of their household was during that 2 kilometers there and 2 kilometers back fetching the water. And they didn't want to lose that. So I think this is a perfect example of ethical but irresponsible technology. Their hearts were in the right place. They wanted to do good for these people, but they neglected to follow responsible tech principles and truly understand their stakeholders, really think about unintended consequences before they just started to build. And I think this is something we're probably all guilty of now and then, but I'm going to try to offer some advice on how we can do better. So again, I am probably preaching to the choir, but I would say that technology shapes our society in ways that are both intended and unintended. And I like the example of the development of the television, because if you go back before TV, living rooms generally were arranged like in a circle, maybe around a radio or something, but people were usually like facing each other and looking at each other. So when people developed the television, marketed it, deployed it, developed it, and everything else, they weren't setting out to rearrange living rooms. That was not like their goal. They wanted to make some cool new technology that was going to make people's lives better in whatever way. And rearranging living rooms was an unintended consequence. And so maybe today we're in kind of post-TV, I'm not sure, different generations, but probably a lot of you, at least at some point in your life, your living room was, everybody sitting against the wall looking at the TV, basically. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but that has an impact on our society, and it should not go unexamined. So it's not just TV. Technology shapes our society in every way. The way we get our news, I do a lot of work around recommender systems and the issues around echo chambers, filter bubbles, misinformation, hate speech, whatever else. And these algorithms have profound impacts on our societies and our democracies. The way we keep in touch with our friends and family. So I was at a conference in San Francisco a couple months ago, which was super cool. And it was bringing together peace builders and mediators with technologists. So they were thinking about like peace builders and mediators probably know something about how to build spaces for healthy conversations, which technologists sometimes have trouble with, or see social media, and vice versa. These peace builders, they needed technology to be able to reach the people that they needed to help. And one of them was pointing out they built this platform for kind of mediation over, video chat, basically. And one thing this person pointed out is that if you have this selfie view in Zoom or whatever, you see yourself as well as the person that's speaking, that actually creates a psychological barrier. If you only see the other person's face, there's this effect they call nose biting distance, which is a great name, and you kind of feel some intimacy with this person, and having the selfie view breaks that. So this is an anecdote, and I like anecdotes, and actually I'm going to put my phone out here just so I can keep track of time. I promise I'm not going to take any calls. There's more anecdotes coming, I promise. But the point is that design decisions that seem, kind of like not that important can have really profound impacts. Speaking of profound impacts, the way we meet our romantic partners. So, I'm kind of past that phase of my life, but I guess people use Tinder or whatever, and apparently 70% of people report now that they met their romantic partner online. And so, of course, you're still choosing who you're swiping on, whatever else, and who you're actually going to date. But at the base level, there's now an algorithm curating our family structures. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a problem. We should go back to, matchmakers or whatever. But I'm saying that there is some social impact from this technology that has gone, I would say, largely unexamined. As well as shopping. Amazon is incredibly effective at curating user experiences to get people to buy things, and the impact of that on sustainability, and don't get me started. And then how we work. Especially since the pandemic, so much remote work, and that has impact on the structures of our organizations. They say you ship your org chart. I think you also ship your office structure in a sense. And there's, different opportunities for more junior people to have mentorship in the office that they don't get when they're working from home. Lots of issues there. So if technology is going to be shaping our society, then probably we should all have a voice in what kinds of technology we're building, in what ways. And that's why I'm a big advocate for transparency. A lot of my answer for how to do responsible tech is just like, hey, let's make sure that the right people can have conversations about what kind of world we're building. So this can mean regulators and journalists and researchers and civil society. It can mean people in this room. It can also mean just like anybody that uses technology or is impacted by technology in their lives. And they have a right to have a voice in this conversation about what sort of society we're building. And further, technologists, developers, builders need to be held accountable to these people. And as, I don't know how many of the people in this room are technologists or builders, but my guess is a lot of you. And we have to be accountable. What we build impacts a lot of people, and we have to be able to listen to their voices somehow. The nice thing is this is happening. I have this triangle of social responsibility, I would call it. Especially in the EU here, the regulatory landscape is evolving incredibly quickly. With the recent passage of the DSA and DMA, I think there were a lot of lessons learned from the GDPR, and I think they're going to have some real teeth. Further, the AI Act, there's still a lot of ways that can go wrong, but at least things are moving in a promising direction. And all around the world, there's more and more happening. So we tell clients that, of course, you want to be in compliance with existing regulations, but also you need to consider risks, for compliance with future regulations because they're coming so fast and can also be so unpredictable. So like what I like to say is like, hey, let's just do the right thing. And then you're going to get ahead of all the regulations, hopefully. And that's where we talk about social responsibility and trying to just do the right thing. And there's this MIT research that I think Alexander mentioned in the keynote. And we've seen more and more that people do care about this stuff and that there really is real momentum inside the business world to start to pay attention. So Thoughtworks has been working on responsible technology for a long time. And I think they've done some really good work. I'm not going to go into the whole history, but when Thoughtworks Finland, which is my home, was acquired, part of the idea was that we were experts in AI and we were going to bring more AI expertise to Thoughtworks more broadly. So a lot of my work has been saying, okay, we can do responsible tech. What about responsible AI? What are the unique challenges? What other skills do we need to learn? What do we need to do to be able to be ready for the unique challenges that responsible AI presents? So I'm going to talk briefly about these sorts of problems. And this is kind of stuff I like to geek out about. So hopefully you all have as much fun as I do. To start out, I mean, as technologists, we solve problems, right? It's like what we like to do. It's our thing. It's our jam. But solutions can create more problems. And when we create a solution, there could be some, unintended, both good and bad effects that we can see here. And we need to be able to understand, the solution we're building, what are its consequences really going to be, and how do we mitigate that to ensure the solution we're building is really going to do what we want it to do. So my personal favorite way of thinking about this kind of aspect of this is Goodhart's Law. And just by show of hands, how many people in this room have heard of Goodhart's Law? Okay, this is more than usual. At least a couple might have heard it in my previous talks, but that's okay. Anyway, Goodhart's Law says that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And I want to explain this really clearly because I think it's really important. So we can have a goal or a value, something that we think is a good thing that we want a product to do. And generally speaking, these things are really hard to measure. So at the same time, we need to come up with some way of measuring whether we're accomplishing our goal. So generally speaking, this works. Our measure is what we call a proxy for a value that we really care about, and there's some correlation between them, and that works really well. The issue is that when you apply optimization pressure to a metric, you tend to break that association. And I'm going to explain this with a kind of funny example. I'm sure it wasn't funny at the time. So I think this was during kind of the colonial era in India. Someone decided there were too many cobras. I guess people were getting bitten and getting sick or whatever. And so their goal, their value was there's too many cobras, we want less cobras. And so they decided, how are we going to make this happen? We need to come up with some metric. And there's like, if people bring us dead cobras, that's one less cobra, right? So you can see that like in the world as it sits now, this is a really good correlation. Every dead cobra is one less cobra. So yes, there is a good correlation between the metric that I'm using and the goal. But then they went and they applied optimization pressure, and that's where everything goes wrong. So they said, let's offer people money to bring us dead cobras. And what happened was on the slide, so I kind of lose the punchline, but people started farming cobras so they could, bring in all these dead cobras and make a lot of money off these bounties. So this is an example where applying that optimization pressure broke the association between the goal and the metric. And I hope you can see why this is relevant for artificial intelligence. So we see a lot of other examples here. So, I mean, when I was at Google, people told me with a straight face, our ads business is super ethical because we're not trying to make money. We're just trying to show people ads that are going to be useful for them. Sounds great, right? But it's really hard to measure if an ad is useful for somebody. I mean, you can like send them a survey and ask them, but if you send that to everybody, you just annoy them. And if people lie, and there's a lot of reasons why this is difficult. So you need some proxy, some metric. And so usually they use ad clicks. So if someone clicks on an ad, probably it's because it was useful, right? And that's not wrong in the absence of this optimization pressure. So, I mean, generally people will click on ads that they like or the ones that they don't. And this kind of sounds okay. But the reason why Goodhart's Law is so relevant for artificial intelligence is that AI, at least what I would call old AI or predictive AI, is incredibly effective at applying optimization pressure. And so the AI that they use for targeting ads finds all the different ads that people will click on, even though they don't get value out of it. And the reasons for that are complex, but the simplest way to put it is just that it's easier to find the bad ads that people will click on than good ads that people will click on. And tells you something about advertising. But you get the clickbait, you get the thumbnail with some half-undressed person, you get the, controversial misinformation, whatever else, and all that stuff ends up getting amplified. The same is true with the Mozilla Foundation. I've done a lot of work on YouTube, optimizing for watch time and how that promotes, really controversial, sketchy stuff. There's this graph in the top right corner here. It's from a talk that Mark Zuckerberg gave some time. And basically what it's saying is any line you set about what kind of content is unacceptable, generally speaking, you'll get more and more engagement as you get closer and closer to that line. So it's basically just this like unfortunate kind of Murphy's Law that, the worst stuff tends to do the best. So I'll hope I'm not going to run out of time and give one more kind of fun example here, because I worked a place where there was a really good example of this and how it's not just a technical system, but a socio-technical system, and people's behavior also follow these sorts of rules. So this company developed a mobile app, and of course they wanted people to use that. So they had a marketing department that was trying to make this happen. And one tool the marketing department had was to send push notifications. They can, make everyone's phone go ding and they see the app and some message or whatever else. And I don't know about you, but generally people hate push notifications, right? Like they're not something that's going to make you really happy unless it's, there's a reason for it. But anyway, but usually, even if you want to dismiss it, like maybe you have to kind of swipe, but if you don't swipe far enough, you instead tap on it and it takes you into the app, right? Or something like that. So this is the setting. So they needed to have a metric. This was the goal they wanted to do to get more people to use their product. And they decided to choose monthly active users. This is a terrible metric for a couple of different reasons. One of which is that, I'm not going to tell you what app this was because I don't want to offend people or whatever. But it's not an app that monthly use makes sense for. It's the sort of app that you should be using like every day sort of. If you're only using it once a month, then like something is probably wrong. So why are they using monthly active users instead of daily active users? I don't know. There's history there. The other is their definition of active. And again, this is something that's difficult to measure. What does it mean to be active in an app? The definition they chose is just to open the app. If you open it, you're considered active, even if you immediately close it. And that's very relevant in just a minute. Whereas you could say you have to actually do something that delivers value in the app. But anyway, so this marketing department, they did some tests in their push notifications. And what they realized is when they send push notifications, their monthly active users spike because a bunch of people end up in the app, possibly unintentionally or whatever, but the metric goes up. Then people get pissed off and leave, and you see the metric decline over time. But because it's a monthly metric, it takes at least 28 days before it starts to decline. So this was the metric that these people's bonuses was being, decided based on. So the bonus date was, I think, the end of the year or something like that. And crazy coincidence, exactly, like to the day, 28 days before the end of the year, they did a massive push notification campaign. They all got their bonuses and scared off all the users. So this is Goodhart's Law at work in a human setting. So what do we do about this? And there's really two kinds of environments. One is where we're doing some sort of analysis. We're running an experiment and actually taking time to look at it to decide whether to launch a new feature. The other is automated decision-making, and they're kind of different situations. So when we're talking about analysis, we want to use suites of metric because a single metric will steer you wrong. There will be some Goodhart's Law impact. There'll be something going wrong. Whereas if you have a lot of metrics, you can usually come up with a more coherent picture of what's happening. So again, a Google story, when we ran experiments on search there, I remember scrolling horizontally. It felt like for like 5 minutes through this, like all these different metrics we'd look at, like, did you click there or there? And how long did you spend before you did this and everything? And the job of the analyst was like almost more storytelling. It was like, how can I imagine a world that this user lives in that explains all these different metric movements? And you try to come up with this coherent picture and understand what the change is actually doing. And from there, there's these launch meetings. You can communicate that to the search leads that really understand the product and everything like that. And from there, decide, is this actually a good thing? It's not just like the metric went up, so we ship it. There's a lot more subtlety to it. For automated decision-making, you can't do that. There are ways to kind of, optimize for multiple objectives, but they all really boil down to just like some function of those objectives, and you have to choose which one's more important and whatever. But guardrail metrics. So if you're optimizing for new user acquisition, like watch what's happening to retention, for example, and if that's, getting too low, fire some alert. Maybe people should look into it and see what's happening. The other thing is subgroup analysis, and it's very easy to create a system that's very good for most of your users, but very bad for other users. So maybe you have some, I've worked with clients in the financial services sector, and you have an app which is, great for people that have, very high account values. So if you're kind of looking at outcomes kind of denominated by account value, it looks like you're doing a really good job, but it turns out people with smaller accounts are really suffering and having a bad time. And there's also really important social justice issues that arise here, where it may turn out that some, population with disabilities or otherwise marginalized population might not be well served by your product, and that can be kind of hidden unless you look at that kind of user within your metrics. So that brings me to discrimination. And I want to say first that if somebody tries to sell you debiased data or a fair algorithm or something like that, please run away. Data is never fair. An algorithm is never fair. We live in an unfair society, and any data that we create or collect is going to reflect that. So further, if we're doing micro-targeting, if we're doing personalization, it's inherently discriminatory. That's the whole point. The idea of doing micro-targeting is that I want you to have a different experience on my platform than you. And there might be good reasons for that, but I have to think about what characteristics I'm discriminating on. And the tricky thing is, and I just published an article on Tech Policy Press about this because it has really important implications for the DSA. If you have adequately rich data, you're inevitably discriminating on everything, basically. And there's some papers like 10 years ago now, how if you know somebody's Facebook likes or their location check-ins or whatever, you can infer their gender, their, politics, their sexual orientation, like all sorts of stuff really easily. And this is like really tough to deal with. I'm not going to get into it now, but it's a really tricky issue. So you have the data generating process. Society is unfair and creates unfair data. The way you collect the data, maybe you only collect data. You're doing some medical model. You only collect data from clinics that are on some network or whatever. And of course, those clinics tend to be in richer neighborhoods or whatever. So now you have more bias. And then the model optimization itself, as we'll see, can amplify that bias as well. So this one's fun. Just in case anybody's not familiar with generative AI and DALL-E, it's a system that allows you to enter a prompt. You can say pictures of lawyers, and it's going to give you a bunch of pictures of lawyers. So this is not true anymore, but as of, 6 months ago or something, if you asked it for pictures of lawyers or a flight attendants, this is what it gave you. And I hope you can all see some problems with this. But the reason I show you this is not just to make fun of OpenAI and say they're really biased. It's to point out that solving these problems is harder than you think. So first of all, I would like to raise the issue that I can't tell you, and I would posit that none of you can tell me exactly how many of these pictures of lawyers should be women or should be Black or should be, whatever other representation. It's not something you can just say half and half because some characteristics are on a spectrum. So half and half doesn't really make sense. And should it reflect, the overall population in society? And if so, which society? Should it be Europe? Should it be the world? Should it be people that are currently lawyers? That's going to be perpetuating inequity. It's a really tough question to answer. So OpenAI fixed this. They said they made a very vague short blog post saying, we've realized we made a mistake and now we fixed it. And now if you ask for pictures of lawyers, you see more diversity, and you did. And people were curious how they did this. So somebody really, really clever, I want to shake this person's hand, came up with a hypothesis and a way to test it. What they did was they entered a prompt saying a picture of a person holding a sign saying, and that was the entire prompt. And when they entered that prompt into the system, what they got was a bunch of pictures of people holding signs, and some of those signs said Black, and some of those signs said women, and some of those signs said whatever else. So all OpenAI was doing was, if it was a prompt that seemed like it might, be affected by these sorts of biases, they would just randomly append, a descriptor of some underrepresented minority or a marginalized population anyway, to that prompt to create more diverse outcomes. And people just rose to them for this. It was just hilarious, actually. But the reason I'm telling you this is because I'm actually more sympathetic to OpenAI than most people were, because I don't really know what a better solution is. And I'm working right now on an article about mitigating bias in generative AI. And I think that what I would advocate for is thinking about the full stack, downstream, what is the impact? So why is it a problem that all these pictures generated of lawyers are white? And you can say, well, somebody's going to use this in some recruiting thing or whatever, and people aren't going to see themselves represented, and that's the problem. And that's good, because now we actually have a real problem. We understand why this is problematic. And if that's the case, then OpenAI's solution actually kind of fixes that problem. Not perfectly. There's a whole debate we could have. But the point is, this is hard, and that we really need to understand, what are we actually doing with this system, and how can we ensure that the system is at least not making things worse, and hopefully doing something to promote social justice. So thinking about equality, and I'm going to go a little bit quick on this because I can already tell I'm going to be over time. Choosing the right metrics, collecting the data you need, and monitoring and evaluating. So there's a lot of different ways to measure equality. There's a great system called FairLearn that came from Microsoft Research, and they have a nice framework that I like. There's others that are kind of roughly equivalent or whatever, but you can think like, do you want demographic parity, which means say you have a system to decide who should get a loan? Do you say that men and women should be exactly equally likely to get the loan? And I mean, maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no, and I'm not gonna offer any more there. But if you say yes, then you want demographic parity. If you instead are a little bit soft and you say, okay, maybe one gender is, historically less likely to be able to pay back a loan, it's okay for the system to take that into account, but at least shouldn't make things worse. It shouldn't amplify that injustice, and you'd be even more likely to deny a loan to whichever gender is less likely to make the payment back. And then equal opportunity is just like a softened version of that you're not unfairly denying a loan, that you can unfairly offer a loan, which is a little subtle, but you get the idea. So even getting the data for this is really tricky. Being able to evaluate and mitigate bias requires high quality data on the characteristic you're interested in. And you can do self-report, you can do inferences. If you're really lucky, maybe you have connection to some government register and you have better data. But generally, there's always systematic errors you need to deal with. And further, there's really interesting tensions between fairness and privacy, and you need to collect more data, even if you're only using it for this. What if the government subpoenas you and you end up with somebody having your data released to a repressive government, or maybe hackers get in or whatever? There's always reasons why data collection is risky. And once you do this, you have to actually pay attention. And so some places I've worked have had really good tools and processes around metrics monitoring, where you have, a specific person that's responsible for a particular period of time to watch particular metrics and make sure nothing's going wrong. You need to make sure that you know what to do when things do change. You need to make sure you understand what sort of change is significant. This is the type of thing that you hire consultants for, I think. Nothing there. But it's a tricky thing to do right. But once it's set up well, it's like a really well-oiled machine, and it can be really effective. And as well, often the things you care about don't show up right away. So you make a change to your product, and only 6 months later do you see that now some population of your users is having trouble. So you need to think about what are your leading indicators or your early warning systems. And there's a lot of nice analysis you can do. You can look historically over your experiments at correlations between different metrics over time, that sort of thing. Do observational work and just do like some product thinking. And there's ways to come up with metrics that you can watch that will move more quickly. So I've mentioned this before, but I think this picture makes it clearer that maybe you have, your satisfaction metric and you have 70% across your users and you think you're doing a really good job, like, yay, pat ourselves on the back. But you're not looking at subpopulations. So it turns out that you have some majority population that are super happy with you, they love you, but you have some minority in your users that actually are having a pretty bad time. And you're never going to know that unless you can slice down into these different populations and actually talk to these people, which is the qualitative side of things. So another topic of AI is manipulation. And this is like a pretty contentious issue. People like to talk about having free will. Everyone says like, oh, I never click on ads don't influence me, whatever. But I mean, like, they do because they make money, whatever. The best way I can think about this, it comes from this Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, for those of you that have seen it. Somebody, and I don't remember who, so if somebody knows, let me know, talks in that movie about tilting the floor. This is the metaphor for AI manipulation. So I could like take the floor in this room and kind of like do this to it, right? So now it's a little bit downhill that way. And so after my talk, maybe you get up and walk around, and you're all, of course, free to walk wherever you want. Maybe you see a friend over there at the top of the hill and you want to go talk to her, whatever, that's fine. But probably more of you are going to end up on that side of the room. And so I haven't like violated anyone's free will, but at a population level, I've had an influence on people's behaviors. Yuval Noah Harari, he's a little bit of a controversial figure since I started using this in the talk, but it's still useful, I think. And he has this great discussion with Tristan Harris of the Center for Humane Technology, where they talk about the idea of technology knowing you better than you know yourself, and how that can give technology a lot of power to influence you. And so this might seem a little bombastic, but he gives a nice example. So Yuval Noah Harari is a gay man, and he was talking about how when he was younger, he didn't realize himself that he was gay at that point. But what he said is that if there were an AI tracking his eyes when he was watching TV, he's pretty sure that AI could have figured out that he was gay before he even knew it himself. And now with more and more wearable tech and more conversational, chatbots, everything like that, there's so many more ways that technology can get to know us. So a personal example, I'm fallible as well. I like to go to this mixed martial arts gym in Helsinki, and it's super fun. Like we do sparring, but like fairly friendly, so we don't hit each other too hard or anything like that. And I love it. It's great exercise. They're really nice people. But I have zero interest in watching UFC fights. Like it's really bloody. It's gross. It's just not my thing at all. So when I started going to the gym, I joined their Facebook group, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. I can find out, what's going on. But then Facebook picked up on this, and it started showing me all these clips from UFC fights in my feed. And it's like if you drive past, a traffic accident or whatever, you can't help but like look and see if there's some like mangled corpse on the road or whatever. When I'm scrolling, I see these clips, and I don't want to watch them, but I can't help myself. It's just like I'm a human being. It's the way I was. So eventually, I actually had to quit this Facebook group just to stop getting these videos, and eventually quit Facebook entirely. That's another story. So I think the point is that, there's a very old sort of like economic psychological thought that people are rational, and there's this idea of revealed preferences. If someone does something, then it's because they're doing what they want to do. And that, can I say that's bullshit? That's allowed here? It's not true at all. So you can't assume that your users are behaving rationally, and you have to think about their best interests. And this can get very philosophical and controversial very quickly, but hopefully that gave you a seed to work from anyway. And yeah, just two papers I like. There's this anthropologist, Nick Seaver, who I have an academic crush on this guy. He does just amazing work. And this is the anthropology of traps, and looking at how he did some work embedded with people that were kind of working with Netflix and kind of some of the first recommender systems, and how that development really echoes the development of traps in kind of like, early humanity or whatever. And then there's this other paper from FACT a couple of years ago, Prediction is the Extraction of Discretion. And this talks about how there's an inherent reason why predictive AI will tend to give people less choice or take people's discretion away. So check that out if you're academically inclined. So some general recommendations, transparency. So when I started working with the Mozilla Foundation, they were like transparency this, transparency that. And I kind of found it a little tiresome. I was like, I want to actually solve the problems. I want to figure out like, how do we build a system that actually doesn't mess up the world? And then I had to like take a breath and calm down a little bit, because like, we don't know how to do that yet. There's a lot of open questions, and that's why we need civil society. We need academic researchers. We need journalists. We need regulators all working together to be able to understand these problems and find solutions. And that's why transparency is so important to enable these conversations. So some people think transparency means like, oh, our code is open source, or we share our model weights or whatever, and okay, we're done. We pat ourselves on the back. And that's not meaningful transparency. First of all, transparency is for different stakeholders, and different stakeholders have different transparency needs. I'm borrowing from one of my Mozilla colleagues here, Bobby Rakova, who's a great researcher, and she talks about how meaningful transparency must be legible, auditable, and actionable or contestable. So legible just means that it's useful to your stakeholder. So if the stakeholder is like the average user and you're sharing your code, that's probably not legible to them. They're not going to be able to work with it. Auditable in the sense that there should be a way to prove that what you're sharing is true somehow. And Bobby does this cool work with this, she calls it terms we serve by, where you can kind of have algorithmic terms of service that are enforceable cryptographically, and it's amazing stuff. And then actionable or contestable. And this, depends a lot on what sort of system you're talking about. But generally speaking, if you feel you've been harmed by an AI, if you feel like, a decision has been made about you wrong, there should be some recourse for you. Whether, in high stakes situations, that should be talking to a real person. In lower stakes, at least there should be some way to amend your profile, whatever, fix the problem. So when I think about transparency, I think about design thinking. And I've never, studied design, but the more and more I've been working in this space, I wish that I had, because I think so much of the sorts of solutions we see come from design thinking. So another great paper with a great name, the fallacy of inscrutability, is by a philosopher, of course, talking about how a lot of tech companies say, oh, this model is too complex, we can't explain it. And they're right in a sense. I mean, I'm a big skeptic of all this AI explainability stuff where you kind of post hoc, do something to your model and get an explanation why it did what it did. Sometimes it works, but generally not very well. But his point is, instead of trying to do that, explain what your system is designed to do. Like, who built it? For what reason? What does the design doc look like? Whose source of data were incorporated in building it, whatever else. And these questions can lead to much more meaningful sorts of transparency. And that paper goes much further into that with a lot of details. So one quick example of why this sort of transparency is important. So this is a US context. I'm from Canada originally, which is why this is kind of natural to me. But I don't know if anyone here heard about Compass. But it was a system used in the US to predict recidivism. That means to predict whether or not somebody's going to commit another crime after being jailed. And it was used to decide if people should be given parole or not, basically. So it was very complex, expensive. Some company made it, really, kind of like black box sort of thing. And there was a great investigation by an organization called ProPublica that does amazing work. And they found that this algorithm was actually super racist. It was really amplifying a lot of inequities in society. So that's one problem. The other problem is that it can kind of seem like magic. So here's some researchers that come in and they develop this method called corals, which is a way to do machine learning that produces models like what you see on the left. And that I'm pretty sure everyone in the room can understand. It's pretty simple. And it turns out that model on the left works just as well as this incredibly fancy 130 parameter Compass model. So, hopefully you can see why you would prefer the interpretable model already, because it's simple, you understand it, it works just as well. Like, hey, why not? But I think there's a more important reason to prefer that model. And if you imagine yourself being a judge in a court, and there's someone in front of you, and you have to decide if they get parole or if they go back to jail, and you have this black box model coming and saying, we predict this person is going to commit a crime in 2 years, and so they should stay in jail. It's easy to get pulled into magical thinking and say, like, this is magic. This technology is doing something very deep. It's seeing into this person's soul. It's probably right. I should trust it, Whereas if you're a judge and you have this corals model and you see, like, this is saying that because this person is a guy and is 19 years old, and then you start to think, like, should I really be paying attention to this model? You apply a little bit more critical thinking. So it kind of demystifies this sort of system. And I think it's points towards what we call at Thoughtworks AI augmented, where a person and a machine can work well together. And sometimes the person knows better than the machine as well. I'm going to skip that other story so I can finish off here. So some practical tools, and there's 3 documents that I would love to point you to. They're all freely available. The first is the Responsible Tech Playbook that Martin mentioned in the opening keynote. And this is full of great tools. When I first read it, I was a little bit underwhelmed. And I was like, all this is saying is just get a bunch of smart people in a room together and think about what can go wrong. And that's true. But it turns out having that conversation in a principled, effective way that's going to lead to actionable outcomes is actually not that easy. And having good ways of facilitating those conversations and good tools to make them happen is incredibly valuable. So I am now a convert and a big fan of the Responsible Tech Playbook. Next, I've written a short ebook, and I've got a few copies of it over there kind of by the speaker, so help yourself if you like. And this is kind of intended to extend the Responsible Tech Playbook to talk more specifically about AI. And the idea is that you can think about an AI system through different lenses. What is it designed to do in a technical sense? What does the code say? What does the PRD say? Whatever else. What do we communicate it's going to do? Like, what do we say to our audience, our users, whoever that it's going to do? And what do users think it's going to do? What's the perceived function? And if you see any misalignment between these 3 lenses, that points to an issue of irresponsibility. So for example, if your privacy policy 13 pages down says, you have to give us your firstborn son, but nobody reads it, then there's a misalignment between the communicated and the perceived function. And just to be clear, the perceived function is not some woo thing. You can do user research, you can do focus groups, you can do panels, and you can ask people, what do you think the system does? And so it's something that can be measured. Similarly, if YouTube says, we want to show you videos that you're going to love and are going to make your life better and or whatever, going to enlighten you, but if you look at their algorithm, it's actually just optimizing for watch time. That's a misalignment between technical function and communicated function. And usually the Goodhart's Law cases kind of fall into that. So if you check the book, there's a lot of other cases where these sorts of misalignments can point to interesting sorts of issues. Finally, just recently, I think it was like not even a week ago, we published a lean approach to AI governance. So this is talking about how you can set up processes inside your organization to ensure that these sorts of risk assessments and mitigations and trade-offs are made. So please do check that out. I should have had QR codes, but I don't. But anyway, if you search for these things, you can probably find them. Otherwise, please feel free to write to me or find me here or anything else, and I'm happy to point you in the right direction. So to recap, AI is powerful. To a lot of excessive hype, but the reality is that this is transformational stuff. This is changing the way that our societies work, that our worlds work, and it's going to have serious consequences. The choices we make, us in this room and a lot of other people as we build it, will have serious impacts. But the good news is that responsible AI is really just thoughtful, robust engineering. There's no magic, there's no import responsible or anything like that. You just have to be thoughtful about what you do. and that tools like this AI design alignment analysis framework, it's a mouthful, can help to manage that complexity. So I don't know if I left much time for questions. Maybe we have time for one or two, but thank you all for listening to me this morning.